Okay, so we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Atlanta FileMaker Developers Group. This week's presenter will be Michael Layne from Gearbox Solutions. We'll be presenting on everything JSON. So let's go around the room and do our introductions. My name is David Mandel from Blue Feather, and we'll get to you last.
Okay.
So we'll go this way.
Christy with Mac Advantage. Erica Kidd.
Russell Haney. Earl Cook.
Todd Daniel.
I'm Junior at 360 Works.
Okay, and our presenter.
I'm Michael Layne. Hello.
All right, and so please take it away.
All right. So hopefully this presentation is, I've got a couple slides. Mostly I'm going to be spending time in FileMaker showing you all what I have done and learned with JSON. So everything JSON. That's me, Michael Layne, Gearbox Atlanta. Just got over that. So a brief summary. This is JSON is a JavaScript object notation. I don't know if all of you know what it stands for, but that's what it stands for. There's a lot of things you could say about JSON. These three things are the most important things to me, and they're also the simplest things to tell you why it's so great. It's super easy to read for a system as well as a person, and it's also it's also easy for machines to parse and generate. For those of you who haven't been here, I would strongly recommend that you go visit this site and just glance at it. I still go here probably a few times a month. I'll think, wait, is that an array or an object or a string or this or that? And this does a really simple job. It's a very cool website. Can't you guys tell? This could have been made last year. It could have been made in 1996.
Yeah.
But it does a good job of explaining what JSON is and the things that you need to know. Not only the things you need to know so that when you read the FileMaker documentation, you can sort of cross-reference and sort of validate yourself. But also, it's nice when you're starting to talk more and more about JSON with other developers and with people that are not FileMaker people, but people that manage APIs and cloud services. When you can use the same nomenclature, pairs and arrays and strings and elements. It's just a good idea to get a grip on some of the stuff. It's not necessary, but it certainly helps. So just want to encourage everyone to go here and reference stuff when you can. All right, these are the uses that we're doing with JSON. I'm actually gonna go through examples of almost all of these. Not logging. I don't know that I have time for that, but passing variables, managing lists. I'll show you some cool things we use to store globals as we store JSON, so we can go up to our globals and get it during a session. And the validating form changes, I'll be interested to get some feedback about that because it's kind of cool, but I just sort of happen to do it a certain way, and you all can let me know what you think. And then there's probably the REST client. That's probably the most common way that people are using JSON and FileMaker, using it to talk to other services. And I'll go through that. And then I also have an example where I actually have a web app that's running, and it talks to the data API to generate things and allow clients to accept an estimate. So we'll go through that last. So just for the sake of everyone, these are the JSON functions that FileMaker gives us. I took a show of hands. Everyone's using JSON for the most part in here, so I'm not going to go through this list unless anyone wants me to or has any questions about this list. Does anyone have any questions about what any of these does? Okay. All right. So let's get to demos. Let's see. And now I need let me get out of this. And
Tom wasn't able to come today, but he's on the stream. He says hello to everybody here.
Go to layout. Okay. So I'm going to open a few systems. Close this and get that out of the way. Okay, this is a super simple solution. Well, I think sometimes I think a teeny little bit of background can help with the big picture. We have a client who they do a bunch of stuff. They manufacture things and they ship a lot of things and they receive a lot of things. And they've got 2 FileMaker systems and then 3 cloud-based systems that manage inventory, shipping, orders, and then they have customers and they do things for their customers' customers. So it's kind of deep and wide. And what this system is something that's going to end up talking to all these cloud-based systems so they have one central repository for reporting. Right now, the first phase, we're just posting orders to a shipping service and we're getting the shipments that when the orders are processed. So, so that's what this solution does. The first thing I'm going to show you is just how I use this to set parameters for scripts. So we've got this navigation up here. So when I click on this, I have a script called go to layout, and it passes some it passes a name, and then optionally we can pass whether or not it's a new window, what the title is, and what the type is. So this is my parameter. So instead of passing a list, or how many of you are familiar with the custom function parameters with the pound? That, I mean, I've used those for years and I love them. This kind of does the same thing, only this puts it in nice, common, real JSON. So we're setting an element, and if you use this to set the element, that means that it's a brand new element and you're not setting JSON to an existing element, which we'll also do here. And then my label or my string is name. I'm passing home, and it's a string. So it's as simple as that. I'm passing this in, and when I the first thing I do is I get my script parameter and I put it in a variable called parameters. So there it is. And you can see right now we already have our nice, clean, simple JSON. And then from here, one of the things that you have to do with JSON, unless you use a custom function, which I actually started to do, is you have to declare each individual variable. So if you're sending a bunch of variables, you have to declare them all, or at least you can declare them all. So I'm declaring my variables by using JSON get element. So here is, I pass in my JSON, which it takes an argument of the JSON and the key or the path or the name. So my key is name, and it gives me back home. There's nothing for type, there's nothing for title. And then I go through and do some things. This is just a script because I have one go to layout that does, kind of does everything soup to nuts for any type of layout I want to do, or whether it's a new window or not. So I pass all this stuff through, and really the point is that ultimately we're going to get down here and we're just going to go to that layout, and I'll just finish it out. So we are at home. So if I go back, I go to another layout. So there's home. Now let's take a look at, let's introduce one more thing. Here, notice this is a calculation. So when I build navigation, a lot of times it changes during over the project's course. The client might want to add something or take away something. And so I usually store all those things, or I use it in a startup script. I'll put all these variables in. And in this case, I actually ended up putting my navigation inside JSON. So the name, I use, even to get the name, I say JSON get element, and then this is something that I created in my startup script, and then I have one dot label. Now, does everyone know what that dot signifies? Okay, so I have three different tabs up there. So I'm going to have 3 different labels and 3 different names. So the 1 just designates the first one. And I'm going to show you the JSON this creates. I'm going to show the JSON that is created here. So when I have my startup script, I write out JSON to create this. So now the first object, I can rename my my labels and my names in my startup script, but I never have to touch my navigation because it's always going to update because it's always going to look at this. So you noticed I had one.label. So one and JSON uses something called dot notation, which a lot of JavaScript does and other programming languages. So the way that JSON works is if I have this one here and a colon, and I have this other these two pairs or this little object. If I say one.label, it's going to give me this. If I say one.name, it's going to give me this value. Now this is not an array. These are multiple JSON objects in here with pairs. Whoops. So did I just delete something? Okay, good. No.
Well, what does the name give you?
So the name gives us SW order. I'm sorry, the label. That's the label. So it's one.label gives me SW orders. See the SW orders, SS shipments, and SS stores.
All right. So what is the name?
The name, that's a good question. So the name is the layout that I want to go to. So I pass it. So now I'm passing, so name, and remember before, my value was home. It was a static string. Now I'm using a JSON get element. I'm passing in my JSON and I'm saying one.name as opposed to one.label. So this is some more sort of I guess I don't know if normalization is the right word, but I'm doing something here where I can change my values all day long and I never have to change my code. So this one.name, when I did this, I realized that my intention was to do it as an array. So I think we all know what arrays are. And I thought, well, what if we did this as an array? What would that look like? So to build a JSON array, so here, see, you all see what's different between this and the other one? So this has square braces, or square brackets.
Yeah.
And that inside of square brackets, if we refer back to our json.org page, square brackets means that it has arrays in it. And you can walk through arrays pretty easily by using an index system for JSON. So you see, I've got this. I wish I could, yeah, let me do this. Okay, see the difference? So this is an array, and it's got 3 objects, and this is just an object, and it's got just nested objects inside. But this array is kind of cool, and when you use REST services, very often you'll get back arrays of records. So you need to be able to familiarize yourself with arrays, which are in these square brackets. So if I'm doing this as an array, I'm going to come here and do this. So if I get an element from my first JSON that does not have an array, if I say to.name, I get back this name. But let's do this. So if it's an array, so there's my JSON. Now I want to walk through this array, and the way we do it with JSON is when I do this in brackets, and you have a 0, because JSON starts with a 0, not a 1. So if I say I want to see the first element in this array, you can see it gives me the first element. Now I using my dot notation, I will say dot label, and there I get my thing. So you can see how these two things, you know, I'm getting to the same destination, but I'm doing it in two different ways. And since it's probably easier when you're dealing with large sets of data, you're going to get arrays back. I think if I did this again, I'd probably use an array, but it really doesn't matter. It's just, you know, I'm just throwing around a handful of labels for a button bar. So does this make sense to everyone? Okay. Okay, let me go
Are you
back.
using the JSON to do the graphics as well, the images that you have, the home and the?
No, those are SVGs. I'm just using, oh, where's my mouse? I'm just using these SVG icons for that stuff. I'm a big fan of Font Awesome, and there are a couple other SVG frameworks that do a lot of. What's the other one I use? Iconicon, or
Guy's got a cool little like, Disney one.
does he?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I've got a question about this. So if we got the button bar at the top.
Mhm.
Do the items in the button bar change? It seems like with the icons that are there, they're always going to be showing the same three things.
That's true. So that's just me taking some design liberties. You're right. If I wanted to, I wouldn't have to go back and I wouldn't have to change any of the code. But yeah, I mean, I chose these icons because, you know, that's the closest thing I saw to a store in 2 seconds for looking. That kind of made me think of shipments, and that kind of made me think of stores.
But what I mean by that is, since the items in the button bar are static, what's the advantage of having this calculation and JSON and everything for the labels?
Different users see a different name.
Yeah.
Or even foreign
Privileges.
language, right?
I mean, for lots of things. I mean, you could get rid of the icons.
No, I mean, I understand how it could be used. I'm wondering what the use case was in this scenario. It seems like they're fixed.
They're not fixed.
Oh,
I
they're not
mean,
fixed.
this is the beginning of a project, and I've done enough projects to know that people might say, we want to see orders, customers, this, that, and the other. And then they say, you know, we also need to see this. I've gone from 6 main nav items to 10 to 3 because then they all get collapsed. And I've done it so many different ways that I just got tired of retyping all this static text.
And this way you can also hide the buttons after, like, per user. If you, maybe a customer service person can't see the reporting section, and automatically hide it.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, but that's what I'm asking about on here. Like, so if you wanted to add a 4th button onto this,
Mhm.
oh, I guess there's already home on there, but you know, that button bar is 3 items, right?
It is 3 items.
Buttons.
So yeah, so
You'd have to go. You'd still have to go to each layout and add a 4th button onto the button bar, right?
well, so what I do, yes, you would, but there's no way around that. FileMaker doesn't
Right.
give us. I've really always wanted FileMaker should give us a layout part, like a header or a top nav that's shared across all layouts. I mean, but they haven't done that yet. So what I do is I always have an anchor, kind of a master thing, because you do over time you end up having to change little things about main nav, and that main nav might sit on 50 layouts. So sometimes, even though it's painstaking, I'll go back to the home, I'll make all my changes, and then I'll grab everything in that header and group it, and I just go through my layouts and paste.
That's the part that I understand how it's working. What I'm not understanding is what is the advantage of this technique versus just having the labels underneath like if you just typed in, you know, SS stores underneath that button.
Because if that changes, I don't have to touch the buttons. I just change it in one place.
So if you wanted to change just the text that was
Or
showing up there.
the layout that it's going to. I mean, partly it's to make my life easier as a developer. I'm trying to do as few things over and over as possible. And so I'm carving out things like the labels and the layout names. I'm putting those all someplace. So this button bar is a dumb button bar. I can throw it anywhere I want. As a matter of fact, sometimes I would take this. We have one project where there's an iPad UI and a mobile UI. Well, that's a great use for this because I can take this button bar, I can pivot it sideways, I can get rid of the icons, and I can put it on an iPad layout, and I didn't have to touch anything except I tweaked the look of look of it, but I'm using all the same data. I didn't have to change any of that stuff.
Now, couldn't you set up your button bar to have spacing for 10 buttons that are scripted to do nothing if you
Yeah.
haven't chosen something? So
Sure you
have
could.
it all set in place at the beginning?
Yeah, remember, so this, yeah, yes, you could. I know that for right now, for this phase of this project, we're only ever doing these handful of things.
Right.
And also, believe it or not, one of my thought process about this is I'm trying to find ways to use JSON as much as possible to kind of make sure that it's worth using. You know, so I'm using it all over the place, but it's sort of like a game. I want to see if I hate it or I love it or it's useful or it's not. And so it's useful to a degree. It's not perfect, but FileMaker isn't perfect either. So
Now, is there any way to incorporate the SVG images through JSON?
Nope.
From,
you can't. I mean, as
File
a matter of fact, FileMaker does not allow you to use SVGs on a layout unless it's inside a button.
What's the SVG?
Scalable vector graphics.
Yes. Yeah.
But can it be a base encoded, 64 encoded that you have in a different parameter that you grab and put it in?
Yeah. I guess you could. I guess you could encode it and read it from that. Yeah,
Right.
you could. Yeah. Yeah, that's a
How
good point. Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. All
You
right.
can set the icon.
Because the icon, Solaris does a kick butt dynamic. You got 30 buttons there, but they dynamically, depending on your user or your account privileges, puts what you want in there. Same logic. It just grabs what buttons for each
Yeah.
individual user.
So yeah, I can imagine exactly how you do that. I just I hadn't gotten
It's
into
just
the
a simple
system.
little
Yeah.
text, right?
Yeah.
Is it a script step or something then? that
No,
allows you
it's
to
all
set
set by your parameters and your user accounts. And when your startup script comes in, it says, okay, who is this person? What buttons do they get?
Yeah.
That's all based off your
No, that part of that I understand. I'm saying, what sets the icon?
your variables. You set a variable for that particular user that logs in. So that user logs in, say I'm customer service. Well, in the startup script, you'd say, oh, customer service, he gets this.
Right, and that's the part that I understand. As far as I know, there's not a set button icon script step.
Yeah. How do you actually set the graphic?
That's what I'm wondering.
You set it as the variable.
Now, what is it stored on? Is it stored
It's
on
stored
one?
up in your
No,
global variable.
Yeah, that makes sense. But what you're saying is you base 64 encode a graphic,
Yep, icon one.
and
You say
then
icon
Is it in a web viewer? I mean, what's the layout object?
Oh, right. No, I don't know.
You're right.
Yeah.
If it's basically, it sounds
No,
like
you could not, because it has to actually be a graphic.
The only way I know to show any graphic you want on the fly is to use a web viewer.
that's what it sounds like.
Or put it in your temporary path, and then when they quit, can you do it that way too?
Well, FileMaker is pretty. I mean, you can put PNGs, JPEGs, TIFF,
Yeah, but
all
you
kinds
never-
of files, but
You
they're
wouldn't be able to script stuff.
yeah, and then SVG. I wish that you could drag an SVG onto the layout, but you can't. They can only exist in a button bar or a button.
The base 64 encoding, it sounds like it's a web viewer, which is
Right.
fulfilling the role of the button bar, and the base 64
Yeah.
stuff gets inserted in there. Gets
Yeah, that's
detected.
yeah. I mean, and the thing is, that's easy to get to if you do some web development. I mean, that's probably the main reason why those 2 times I thought I'm never going to do FileMaker again, because I was doing a lot of web development. To come back to your question is, I find that you can have 10, and we have a lot of solutions where we have 12, a button bar with 12 buttons, but 9 or 10 or 11 are shown based on a user or based on, hey, they can't see budgets or something like that. I'm kind of a stickler about visual stuff, and my problem with that is, and I've gotten over this, but my problem is that these buttons are all sort of consistent in their width, and if I hide,
It changes the width.
yeah, it changes the width. I'm gonna,
Stretches it.
yeah, because I wish that. So now these things are they're long and spaced out, and it doesn't look consistent across all layouts unless everything is the same, and it just looks weird. If someone has three buttons in a button bar, and then the next person has 8. I mean, it's hard to do that with the real estate sometimes. So that's why I have some tricks to get around that, but but you certainly could do that. And I mean, if Marty were here, and I know if Jesse were here, Jesse would say, "Who cares?" All right.
You have to come. We're
Yeah.
speaking for him now.
So let me keep on moving because I'm sure I have a lot of stuff. And
What was that other option for pixels, for graphics, pixel something, for icons?
you mean another?
Yeah, you said it earlier. You both said
Yeah.
Font awesome, Comic-Con.
There's a bunch. There's a website called, I think it's flaticons.com or something. There's tons of tools out there. Actually, someone, a FileMaker developer, made a bunch of FileMaker icons that you can download as a set, and I don't remember the name, but there are all kinds of.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see. I did managing lists.
Say flat icon, right?
Flaticons.com or something
Yeah,
like
flat
that.
icon.
We're in
Yeah.
so many
Where's
things
that?
you know. not
Store
just
globals,
the
North Star, Polaris, virtual valuelist. Okay,
What is it called, guys? Set of icons?
Yeah, they're free.
Oh, is it free?
Yeah, it's 100% free. Just go there and download.
and remember to, if you want to use them in a button or a button bar, get the SVG, because the nice thing about SVGs is they scale beautifully. So I have every graphic on a layout for me is in SVG, so it scales. So even if I just need an icon, unfortunately I have to use the weight of a button, but it's a button that doesn't do anything, but then I get the SVG.
And they can be multiple colors, and you
yeah,
can set
yeah,
them so
you
that
can-
you can color them in your
Yeah.
FileMaker options as well.
Yeah, Matt Petrowski, he's great about showing how you can do all kinds of stuff like that. So let me quickly get moving on. So this is a 100% mobile solution, and it's so a little background on this. It's a company that it's an EMS company, so they have 200 ambulances, and they have they go out to responses and they do these calls, and they are bound by some very strict government guidelines. So they have to capture a ton of information. As a matter of fact, there's something like 280 data points that they capture on 30 layouts. One number I can give you, because I'm going to be talking about it in a minute, is the amount of value lists in this system. There are 72 value lists in this system. And that is the main thing that I want to focus on. So forgive this. The green here is just me. I'm logged in with full access. So I'm seeing all this stuff that a normal user wouldn't see.
They would do this on an iPad.
Yeah, this is all all the UI except for some a couple other things are all iPad. Sorry, this thing is. Can I move
This is
that?
why you get $1,000
Oh,
bill
sorry.
when you get a ride to the hospital.
Okay, I don't know what I just did. Okay, all right. So all these green things, these are these Nemesis codes. We have to generate this giant amount of XML, something like 600 lines of XML for each patient that they have to upload for some government database. So there are all these element groups. There's e-patient and e-exam and e-profile and e-medication and all this stuff. So this e-patient 15, or yeah, e-patient 13 and 14, you see those are value lists, right? They're drop downs.
Yeah.
These drop downs, that's simple enough, female, male, not applicable, but these are all given to us by this government entity, and this spec can change. So and there are 72 value lists, and you see these numbers underneath here that you also can only see if you're logged in on a desktop and full access. So white is, if I change this to Hispanic or Latino, that number changes. That's the value that gets sent to the database, not Hispanic or Latino. But of course, we need to have these human readable value lists that generate these numbers. So got 72 value lists. I guess hopefully everyone would agree with me. You're not going to go into FileMaker's value list maker and have, type out all these or copy and paste all these static lists. There's no way. So, excuse me. So what we do is, and there are a couple of hoops to get to the end of this, so please bear with me. I'm going to run over to this backdoor layout and show you. let's see, the schema is. So here, I'm going to look for ePatient 13 or ePatient. All right. So here's this, here's ePatient 15. You see there are 587 elements, and then several of the elements have, some of them have 100 or more options. Sometimes it only takes one option. Sometimes you can have multiple options. So you can send 20 parameters for one thing. This particular one, actually, you know what,
These are all your drop-down items.
yeah, you know what I just did? ePatient, oh, sorry, I typed the wrong one. I think it's, there we go. So,
Cool.
all right, okay, here's the element, ePatient.14. That element has a UUID that the system keeps track of up here. And this UUID is, you know, this is the primary key, and then all these guys have foreign keys that match this. So on the fly, I need to create value lists. I need to create 72 value lists at different times on different layouts wherever the user is. So there is a module from FileMaker, modularfilemaker.org called virtual value lists. Has anyone used that? Okay. So virtual value lists is awesome. It's a way to dynamically go to your data and generate a value list on the fly. So I used that, and it was great. The problem is when you are, the way you set up virtual value lists, and you can help me remember this, but I believe it's an on-object enter and then maybe on-object validate or on-object save. There are a couple different things you do so that when you, as soon as you click on that thing, it loads that value list. It does not work in FileMaker Go. So I couldn't use it, but I set up a bunch of value lists, doing all this testing. Oh man, this is great, this is great. And then I went to my iPad and I was showing someone, and I went to these value lists, and they were all, you click on a drop down and just nothing was there. It was just blank. So did a little troubleshooting, and what I came up with was what I was going to have to do was I was going to have to load these value lists when the layout on layout and when the layout loads, because I couldn't do it after the layout loads on an iPad. So, and by the way, here are these, you know, here are all these virtual, you can read the documentation about how to set this up, but there's one layout where I have 13 value lists. So I have to have at least 13 iterations of this to work. So a lot of it's sort of like it's virtual list. It's just virtual list for value lists. So what I do is I know that I need a value list for, let's see, you can't really see that, but that's E14 and E13, maybe a couple others. So when I go to my layout setup and my script triggers, on layout enter, I have a script called set virtual set virtual list, and then I pass element. And for me, when you see those square brackets, that means that you can pass, you know, multiple iterations of the element. So now here, most of this was designed and built before 16. So hopefully you all recognize this is using the parameters custom function to pass variables. I can do this in JSON too, but I'm not going to go, it's not worth it to go back and redo all this just for the sake of doing that. So I have 3 value lists on this layout. I need one for ePayment 32, ePatient 13, and ePatient 14. And so I pass in 3 element names. Now it's a lot easier to pass in ePatient 14 than, so if I use the primary keys, I'd have to do this. Believe it or not, we are getting to some good JSON stuff. I'd have to do that for 72 things, and who wants to try to keep track of UUIDs for all that? So it's much easier for me to keep track of it like that. But I need a way to go and get the key when I pass this in. So set virtual list. Let's take a quick look at that script. I get my parameters. I loop through, and then I have this. You can. I use SQL to go and get all my keys. But the thing to note here is I set a variable, and this is a let statement, and ultimately it's just a custom function. So I'm not really setting the variable to anything. I'm just using that to set something. But here's the key: ID equals set VBL, and then I pass in the element. So remember, our element is ePatient14. So set VBL ePatient14. That's the ID I need. So now I'm going to take you to that custom function.
If you've got stuff to point to, if you do it on the screen, then people watching online will be able to see.
How can I? Oh, you mean like this?
Yeah.
So I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about that. Anyone who's watching, or all of the thousands of people that are. No. All right. I apologize. So what was I doing? I was going to show you the custom function. All right. So I kept this here actually. So it used to be this, and this is when I was using other custom functions and list views to get JSON. But now I don't need any of that.
I know those custom functions that you're using, and the new stuff is so much faster.
It is
than
way
the other stuff,
faster.
yeah.
It is way faster and so much easier. I mean, I've gotten rid of hundreds of lines of code because there's one project where we have to do a ton of JSON stuff, and now it's just
Do the
it's
let
just native.
notation, that kind of thing,
Yeah. It's really painful. It's really painful. But it was the only way to do it in FileMaker until 16.
But the process, like the actual CPU time, is way faster.
Those scripts took an awful lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
So I because JSON uses dot notation, I can't pass in something with a dot in the name, and unfortunately that spec by that government agency NEMSIS, it's all XML and everything is dot this and dot that, which is, I mean, I don't know anyone who would have designed a spec to do that. But anyway, they did, and so what I do is I name all this. So I substitute it with an underscore. So now so when I do this, I just get an element. That's really what I'm doing. I'm using JSON get element. This is the JSON that I'm passing in, and then that's my string that I want to get, or that's my key. So now we're going to go look at JSON.vll. I got out of that. So if I go to my data viewer, I'll look at what's in this thing. Ta-da! So hopefully now everyone can see why I go through all these hooks. So all I have to do is I pass in my ePatient. I pass in my ePatient14. It goes to this JSON. It gets the key. And then my SQL query goes and gets my values.
Cool.
And then it populates all that. So this is a way for me to, honestly, I wanted a way to easily get this. And then this is probably one of the very first things I did when I went from 15 to 16, is I was able to, I probably stored all this just as text, but it's much easier to write and also easier to parse when you're using JSON. I'm just looking for my key. So I get this thing, and my SQL query says, go get all the values where the ID underscore element is CO48, blah, 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 blah. So that's that was a long road, but hopefully you see that when it got down to it, it's super simple, simple little disparate objects that get me where I'm going. So virtual values, validation form changes. All right, so let's go take a look at, I don't want to save anything. I'll log out, and then I'm going to close this. Excuse me. All right. So, we doing okay on time? Okay.
Yeah.
This is opening their old file as well, because it looks at things, so I've got to log into it as well. You'll start to see it. I'm sure you're all sitting here thinking, I'm starting to see a pattern about the way this guy designs and uses his layouts. But it works. So this is a company that does asphalt, paving, all that kind of stuff. So this is also very early on the stages of a pretty significant project. But all I really want to show off is, well, I'm going to show a few things in this one. First of all, we're going to go look at a company. So this is this company. So yeah, they're a vendor, so I don't know that. And we've got some contacts. So up until for the last few years, we've heavily used modals and selector connector to do stuff, and it's great, and we use it all the time. But when FileMaker comes out with something new, it's always, well, we always try to at least do a deep dive and see what the benefits and what the pros and cons are of doing something. And Marty he thought card view was great, and there are a lot of advantages to card view. Does everyone know what I'm talking about? Okay. So prior to 16, this would have been a popover. Now it's a card, and there are lots of benefits to that. So this is Shannon Layne. She's a Rhino expert, and her type is a concrete sales, and her email address. So I'm just going to cancel. I didn't do anything, and I canceled. As a matter of fact, I'm going to add a new contact, and I can have a new contact, but I'm going to cancel. No, I'm going to add a new contact, and I'm going to type John. But you know what? I'm going to cancel because I was going to add someone, but I decided not to, so I typed John. Now I'm going to go into Shannon, and I'm going to change her title to. I'm actually going to. You know what? I'm not sure what her type is, but I'm going to remove it. So I just removed her type, and I don't know if you all noticed. You probably weren't. You know, I'm looking here, but you didn't. But her type actually just went away. So when I changed that, the record committed, and her type went away. And I can also. I'm going to change her title to novice. So does everyone believe me that novice is now the record set? Okay, so I'm in here, and I'm going to cancel, and it says, are you sure you want to exit without saving your changes? Because I know that I made changes. And I'm going to hopefully this is mildly interesting to you all. And I know there are probably lots of ways to do this in FileMaker, but I'm doing it with some JSON and some MD5 hashing. That it's kind of neat. I think you know what I'm doing, right? So I'm going to say, no, I don't want to exit. So I'm still here. Now I'm going to save it. So I saved it, and sure enough, now she's Rhino Novice. Let me go back and yeah, you all, if I don't save it, so there she is. She's a chief financial officer, but I'm going to cancel, and I'm going to say yes. She's no longer chief financial officer. So what are we doing here? So I've got the script, upsert contact. It's a combination of, I'm updating and inserting, and it's kind of a web thing. But actually, you know what I want to do? I'm going to. Is it better? Is it easier? Is it better? Do you all prefer to walk through a script, or do you prefer to open up the script and look at the script as a whole and look at it? Anyone?
Either way.
Okay. Okay. So let's walk through it. Actually, I'm going to save you a little bit of trouble. So the parameters, I get my parameters, and by the way, I'm using JSON to set parameters. One of the things I set here is an action. So the action is, what's my action? Edit. My action is edit. So when I'm editing something, I'm not too concerned. I make sure that I'm in my card window. I do something to set that, because this is a system that it'll be for mobile as well. So I figure out what my platform is. And I'm just walking through this, and it's gonna, Yeah. Okay. So I'm editing. My action is edit. So so I just, for a sanity, I make sure I just find that one record. I just want to make sure I'm looking at that one record. So I pass my ID in. I do a find. Now I set my existing values. So what I do is let's see. So I have this contacts.json, and all I do is I set every field with its value, and I store it. So pretty straightforward. Actually, I didn't have to show you that. I could have just done this too. So there it is. There's all Shannon's information right now. Now I'm done. I'll close this. So here I am. So now I'm going to change. I can change anything I want, but I'm going to change one thing. Now that's just a commit. So now I'm going to cancel. Let's get down to cancel. Okay. I'm not saving. I'm canceling. So remember when I added a new record, I typed John, but I hit cancel and didn't do anything? That's because when I use add, I set a flag so that I just go ahead and blow away the record. Now that's not the case. So I'm not adding. So now what I do is, you know what else? What I didn't show is, forgive me, I missed something. Something else I set when we edited the record in the first place is I set a hash. This hash was an MD5 of all the values that I stored. Okay, so that's a unique key. A hash is not an MD5 is nothing more than some unique string that is, you know, it's the value of whatever it is you set. It's just an MD5 is a hash. So I set this and I stored it. So that's my saved state. So I've got all my values and I've got a key for all my values. So the next thing I do is I just created another hash. This hash is of the current values. So my hash here, and they're different. That's right, they are different. They are different. Since they're different, that's how I know that, hey, you did something. Are you sure you want to continue? So if the hashes are different, I showed this warning. Are you sure you want to exit? If I say yes, then I reset everything using JSON. So remember, when I first edited the record, I stored everything in contact.json. So now I'm going to that JSON and I'm setting the first name. I'm setting the field to the first name, last name, so on and so forth. So I'm basically, this is a fake way of reverting a record. And then I clear out my globals and I'm done. So there's a little bit of JSON in there, and that hash is kind of a cool trick to compare, you know, two versions of something that you're in the middle of.
I like the different values. It's really cool.
Yeah. Okay, so
Got a question.
Yep.
Not entirely about the JSON. I know you use a lot of global variables. Why did you choose to use global variables over a global field? Did you have a preference about this?
yeah, I just because I'm just more a fan of thinking about stuff that's not stored in the data, I guess. Even though it's temporary, I put everything in globals. The only time I use global fields is when because you need them for inputs.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm using a search term for quick find or something, I'll use a global. But I tend to use variables, and I think part of that is because I'm also a PHP developer, and I'm just so used to storing things in a session variable,
Mm-hmm.
because there's no reason to store that data ever or to put it any place. And if you're not in FileMaker, you would never put it anywhere anyway. There's no place to put it. It's in your logic in memory.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think mentally that's why it's almost like storing it in memory, which I guess it is. So that's, yeah, I do. And
Do you have to use a global table ever? Or do you ever have like a table as just global things?
I do for certain things. So for selector connector, I have to have a table to store all my keys when I go and get values for something. So I have a selector, I have a connector, and then I have a third table that we use, and it's just find in all caps. And that's where if I do, I'll have something where I'll use SQL to build. I'll build a dynamic SQL query if I'm looking for projects. There are 10,000 projects, and I want all the projects for 2017. So my query, I write a SQL query that says, just go get me all the IDs where project year is 2017, and where maybe something like the project owner is the person with this contact ID, and maybe the project first name starts with a G. So I dynamically build that query. It runs out and it gets all those keys, and I have to stick them in a global to drive the relationship. Because you can't have a relationship with I stick them in a global field because you can't drive a relationship with a variable. So that's the biggest time I use those. Okay, so CGP post order. So I'm going to look at something that hopefully it sounds like a lot of you are doing, and that is posting an order using FileMaker as a Rust client. So I'm going to go back to our CGP and go into an order here. So these guys have, I just find all the records that I've been using for testing. So they have, I'm going to get rid of this number. I'm not going to create any orders right now because it wouldn't be good for me to do, but I am going to, I'm going to post this order. And when I post the order, it either creates a new order or it updates the order. So that's something that my logic has to do. But notice I just got rid of the order ID because the order ID is the thing I get back from ShipStation, which is this API, which is this REST service. So all this data comes from the client's system, this SW orders, this ShopWorks orders. So what we do is we import a certain type of orders from their system into this integrator. And then I go ahead and post this order. And when I do that, voila. So what I just did was that's my proof that this thing actually got all this data, mashed it all together, sent it to the API, and I got an order queue back. Now, when I get that order back, so let's walk through this. Another thing that we're huge fans of, and I'll promote this for a second, is logging. So all this stuff is logged, and some of it's actually in JSON. So here's this call. You can see that this happened in 0.6 seconds. Super fast. So what are we doing here when I post that? So this is kind of an involved script, but let me walk through it briefly. I go to my I go to my layout. I have to figure out how many addresses I have, because in this system, what this company does is if they have one ship to address, then it's one order. But if they have 4 ship to addresses, it's 4 orders. We have to create 4 orders because we have to create a whole order for each ship to. That's just the way their business rules are. So that makes it a little more complicated. But all we have to do is concentrate on this one. I think the one we just did, it only had 1 address. So if we only have 1 address, if the address count is 1, then we set our method, and the method is the API. And we're gonna look at we're gonna actually look at the documentation for this so you can see what we're doing. The method is create orders. That's ShipStation's method. And then I start by creating an empty JSON object that has an array in it. It's an array inside of an array. So I create this thing called orders, and it just sits there for a minute, because eventually I'm going to have all these bits that are nested inside, and I'm going to fill orders with it. And when you look at the end result, you'll see what I mean. then my ship to is, I build ship to. So I make a variable called ship to, and that's pretty straightforward. It's a new object called ship to as a variable, and then I just add the fields in. So that's pretty straightforward. And I do that for the build to, and then advanced options does the same thing. Then I need to make my order. The unique order with just the order information. Then I have to build all the items. Now the items are an array. So we talked about arrays earlier. And let's see. So I loop through, oh yeah, here we go. The items are array. I get all my information about a line item right here. So that's one line item. Let's say I have 10 line items. This is one of them. And I loop through each line item. And when I do, here's that little bit of magic here, right here. You remember when we we had the layouts and we changed it from a bunch of objects to an array of objects? And then we used the 0 inside the brackets to get it. So that's what I'm doing. So I have an n that starts with 1. And so items, the first element in the array, which is 0, is the JSON that I just set, and it's an object. So this becomes, I think it's best if I probably show what this looks like at the end. So then we have this order, and we build all this stuff too. There's my ship to, and there's the variable ship to, and it's an object. It's not a string, it's not an array, it's an object. And all of this stuff ends up being put in the body here. And the reason I make a global here is so that when I'm finished, while I'm doing development, I set globals all over the place. That's a big reason why I do it, is so I can immediately go look in one place to see what went wrong, what happened, what was the data like. I can see it all in one place. I don't have to go to a table or have another window open. So I'm going to skip down to this part. So unless I'm mistaken, every part of dealing with a REST API is FileMaker's vastly improved insert from URL. So here's where, I guess here's where a big chunk of the magic happens. And I'm going to walk through this just in case some of you haven't done too much of this. My target, here again, it's not a field, it's a variable, but that's all I need. So I'm glad that they did this, because I always wanted to store these as variables and I never could, but now I can. So I stored it as a variable. I can always set it to a field later. As a matter of fact, I do set some of the stuff. I write it to a log. The URL, that's something, so I set, they have a production URL and a dev URL, so I set some variables. My model, as we saw earlier, it's create orders, and then there's a method and parameters, although there aren't any for this. And then this is the part that I personally have seen the most questions from people reaching out to me when they're trying to do insert from URL with new curl headers. This stuff is a little bit of voodoo until you get used to it. But these are the headers in curl that make all this stuff happen. So the first line is saying that it's a post. So, you know, there's post, get, put, patch. Those are all HTTP verbs that REST uses. So post usually means you're posting data and it's a new record. If this said put, conventionally you'd be updating a record. I'm saying that I accept JSON back, and I'm telling the system, and by the way, FileMaker will actually bark at you and not let you in if you don't put this string. Later on, we're going to talk about talking to FileMaker, the FileMaker Server Data API, and I'm pretty sure it's required for you to tell it the content type, just to say, hey, I'm sending you JSON. I'm not just sending you something. I'm sending you JSON. Then I'm passing my credentials in, and for this particular API, it takes the user, and then I've got this API key : API secret. This next one is extremely helpful when you're troubleshooting. It's not necessary, but when you pass this switch of dump header, you get back all the header information. It captures the header of the response that you get back from the API. If you don't do that, the header came down, but you didn't, there was no way for you to grab onto it. So this is how you grab that. So I store that in a global called shipstation.header. And then finally, I was just talking to someone about this last week. They were doing all these things right, but they said, my data is not going through. It's because you got to pass your data like this. So it's -D and then ampersand. Huh? Yeah, I'm sorry. And then of course you all saw that I set my body. So my body was all that JSON. So anyway, that's the bit that makes all this work.
And just, I mean, that is a string.
Yeah.
Yep.
But it's a variable. Like FileMaker is going to look for the variable.
It's very weird how
That's
it
very
handles
weird.
it. I'll let you all this JSON stuff.
Yeah, I thought that. Yeah, I totally agree. Because the first time I did this, of course, I would have never done that because I would have put, in quotes ampersand and then my variable. But
Right.
you're right, it doesn't work. Yeah. Yes, that's a string, but it works.
It's a string that
Yeah.
matches your variable.
Yeah, actually, all this is just a string, and one of the ways you can tell is because I'm escaping these quotes around the except and the content type.
You've got some places there where you have variables that you're using which are not inside the string and they're being appended in with
Yeah.
ampersands.
Yeah,
And then, but the actual data has to come in with that @ and then variable name
Yeah.
inside.
even this doesn't really make sense to me either. I mean,
Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. All right.
yeah, I mean, because that's,
Does that parse it out there? That looks like that would not.
yeah. Oh no, it does. It does. Yeah, it does.
But it's inside the string.
I know. Well, believe me, it does. So here's the proof. We get our response code back. The response code would be 200 or 100 or 404 or 403 is those are common response. 200 means okay. 403 means I think the privileges were incorrect.
Oh, real quick, I just want to comment on the reason that you have the variable inside the quotes in that part is you're not reading the value from it. You're telling FileMaker which variable you want it to create after the insert from URL step. So that's why.
Some evaluate on pliers. It's probably doing some evaluate. It's like doing its own evaluation when it's.
Yeah. So he's not getting the value for that SS header there. He's telling FileMaker, after you do this, make a variable called SS header and put the value in there.
Yeah, that's true because that's what's happening here. So I get I'm just looking for that. I mean, in PHP or Python or so many other languages, it's so easy to get some of this stuff. FileMaker, I've got to do this just to get my I want that number 200 because that's the thing that tells me it's okay or it's waiting or it didn't work or all that. So then we so basically I figure out since this is an array I sent, so I get something called has errors back, and then I get a bunch of results, and I get results back for each order that I created, and then for each order I created, I then using selector connector, and I won't go into all this, but I'm happy to at some other point if anyone wants to ask. So I set a timer and I loop through each of my results, each object in my results array for each order I created. I loop through and I create a log file for it. So this is just a very quick and dirty and easy way to create a log. And then yeah, so that's it. So let me quickly go here and show you what the other side of this looks like. I create an order. So this is what you do. So creating an order, remember, and actually I take that back. I'm going to create, so since the system that we did, it can create multiple orders. And so I always create multiple orders. Sometimes I'm just passing one order in, but I'm really, I'm using the I'm using the endpoint to create multiple orders. So let me click that. So notice I had that variable I set method, and it was create orders. So what it looks like is, so this is my URL that I hit. Of course, I pass. Sorry. So this is telling me, hey, the content type needs to be JSON. The authorization, I pass my basic authorization in, and this is the body. This is what it's expecting. So the JSON I did, the JSON I sent, trust me, it looks just like this. Notice my bill to. See the bill to, there are pairs inside the bill to object. And so that's why I had that bill to as a separate thing. And when I built it out, my bill to wasn't a string, it was an object. So it ended up inserting all that data. And you'll see that it nests the ship, the things that I made independently, the bill to, the ship to, and the items, and there's a bunch of other stuff I could have passed, but none of this is important to the client except for advanced options. We need to pass in a store ID, which is right here. That's the only reason I had to create an advanced options object, because I needed to pass the store ID in. So,
It's a nice API.
yeah, it's a great API.
I use Rocket Ship, and it's a little bit better than this one.
Really?
Rocket Ship IT, it has a debugger built into it. You can see it live on screen.
Wow, that's cool. Yeah, this actually has a console into it, but I've never used it. There are so many great APIs out there now, and it used to be there were none, and now they're all pretty good. Is that what they do? It's one stop, and you can pick FedEx, UPS, all that stuff.
Everything.
Yeah.
Rocket Ship, and plus I implemented it 2 years ago in PHP. I'm in my own little PHP page, and I just did it back and forth. But now there's a newer version, 2.0, which does it all right within it.
Yeah, that's neat.
It's nice that it does it off to the side.
And you pay $500. Well, when I did it, it's $500. That was lifetime. I'll never have to pay nothing ever again. But now with the 2.0, they got a monthly fee every month. So that's why I haven't upgraded yet.
So I mean, our client, they use ShipStation. They're going to use it for this stuff, but they actually have ShipStation interfaces with Magento and Shopify, and they've got something like 70 stores inside here. But we're doing this project for this one particular type of manufacturing they do, and that's why we pass in a unique store ID. So then here's the response. Remember I said I'm always looking for a number? So that response code comes back as 200. It sends back a header, and then there's the body. And you'll notice I had some variables. I had has errors, and I grabbed what that is. And then remember, here are square brackets. So that means that this result was, they're showing me one order, but I would get one of these for every order I created. So if I had 4 addresses, I get 4 of these back, and I write logs to 4 of them. So, so hopefully you all can see that we walked through that whole FileMaker script. Really, all it does is just generate exactly this, and it does it compared to what you had before 16. It's just night and day.
You're really taking advantage of curl and JSON in the new version.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. When we get shipments back, this is worth showing you. Is we have to 8:30, right? Because so we're good. I think I've got 2 things, and I'm gonna make it. So these are shipments. Shipments. Let's see. I'm gonna get rid of, just to show that this is working. I'm gonna get rid of the shipping costs and the tracking number, and I'm gonna update the shipment. And it just went up there and got it, and you can see we just got a new log. 200 happened in that fast. So this is kind of cool. If I go up and they can search for shipments for a day, or they can update the current shipment. But if they search for shipments in a day, we might get 5 shipments or 20 shipments, however many we get back. We're actually creating records from scratch. So I encourage all of you to, when you're dealing with an API and you're kind of a slave to an API, which this system is, just use all your field names should just match. It just makes it so much easier than doing something different. So in this table, these field names are all their field names. And it comes in really handy, with one exception. It comes in really handy when, let me go
So you just mirror it?
yeah, I just made sure that the field names are exactly what those field names are, and this is how it can be so helpful. Is let's see. Yeah. So this is the layout it uses. So let's go take a look at the get shipments. So in this case, so here's a sneak peek at, you know how I was setting my I was getting my, look at that.
You just have to bring in data from Salesforce. I wish I had known this thing.
Oh. So this is a custom function that grabs all the JSON that you send in your parameters and parses it out. So I just got, I guess I got a little lazy and I wanted to try this out. I had written my own and it was a little bit brittle. And then a couple weeks ago, Soliant came out with this one and I put it in and it works. And so I just don't have to declare every single variable, especially when I have a lot. So I get my variables. I go to this layout, and so here's where I go. My method is called shipments, and then here I'm doing this in get. So there's the key here is I'm using insert from URL. I'm passing all that same stuff. I'm not passing any data because I'm doing a get. I'm getting information, so there's no data to pass. So I'm doing a get, and it's the URL does the rest of the work. So I get my information back.
There's a difference between it looks like you're passing stuff, but you're not. Like you're passing request information. It's not like.
You mean here?
No, it's not that, but like you're gonna pass the store ID or whatever the order ID into it, but that's something that's the query. That's not.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're right. I mean, yeah, you're right. I'm not passing data in here, but I am. So here, remember before I had, so my string is my URL, method, and params, and you're right. So one of the parameters I pass in is I pass in either an order ID or dates. So if my method, if the order ID is not empty, then my params is question mark order ID equals question mark, right? So that's what you're talking about. Yeah, and if we go back and look at the API for shipments, the model.
Well, it's a quote unquote piece of data. It's not data as far as posting or sending like all this stuff.
Yeah, it is literally parameters inside the URL, right?
Right.
So you can list the shipments without parameters, and that's the URL. It's got nothing, and you're going to get a bunch of information back. And if you might be thinking, well, that's just getting every shipment, but it's only going to get the shipments that those credentials are going to allow to get. But here's what we're really doing. We're listing shipments with parameters, and it's telling me that I can literally send all these. They're all the parameters I can send. No, that's create shipping label. No. These are all the ones I can send. So I'm only doing order ID, or I do ship date start and ship date end. So if I pass in dates is true, that's a Boolean flag for when I'm on that other layout. When I click that button, I pass a parameter called dates, and if it is dates, then and here is an example of me. David mentioned about using, storing globals and variables as opposed to fields, but this is one place where I don't know how to do this other than use fields, right? So these are my global fields, ship start, ship date. And then this is just formatting the dates so that it matches that string.
Because the client did that. It's the client's field. That global field. Is that the field that they're interacting with or whatever the script is?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, that's exactly right. So, so this is one of my favorite parts of the script, and I'll show you why in a moment. I remembered this is one of those things I missed when the whole thing about using layouts and just getting all the fields on a layout. I never really got why people did that for a long time, and then finally I realized all these smart people were doing it. I'm like, oh, there must be something good about it. But I finally took advantage of it here. So I'm setting a variable fields to field names get, this is one of those, I think it's called a design function.
That's a design.
Yeah, a design function, which basically gives you all the field names in a
Field
file,
names is, yeah.
field names, but you have an optional parameter of what layout you want to reference. So this is my layout, SS_shipments. So I figure out how, so I don't even have to think about that layout. This function plus getting a value of how many there are, because I need to know that, this is all I need. So I figure out how many fields I have. I think there are 26. And then I start a counter. And the reason it's field_n is because I have a few other counters going on in here. And then I'm looping through. And remember I said I had, with an exception, I had every field name match the API field name? Well, if we look back at this API, we get our shipments back. But see, when we get to ship to, all of a sudden, I mean, these are my field names, but ship to, you know, if you're thinking about this in terms of schema, you might think that the ship to stuff might be in another table, but might be in a related table. We don't care about parsing that out. All we care about is the data that comes back. But because it's JSON, I can't get to this without using dot notation. I need to do ship to dot name. There it is. So but I can't do that for all these values. So I get all these values back. And notice this ship to. As soon as I have something other than something at the highest level, something that's not nested, I look at every field. And for every field I look at, I see if there's an underscore in the name. And let me go back here and point out that for my ship to, see, all my ship to is ship to underscore this and ship to underscore that. I just want to store it in the same table. I'm not going to create another related table or anything like that. So as I'm looping through all my fields, I look to see if the field name has this. And if it does, then that dot notation works. The value is going to be ship to dot name, ship to dot address, ship to dot this, ship to dot that. If it doesn't have it, I'm sorry. Yeah, wait. If it's not, it does. Otherwise, yeah, this, I'm sorry, I had it backwards. But if it is, then I substitute the dot for ship to dot name. For my field name is actually ship to underscore name. So I make that substitution, and then I'm able to set all those other fields. So I'm setting all those fields from here to here, which is really awesome, because if you didn't do that, you would do, let's see, where's an old version of this? Yeah, no, that's, no, hold on, bear with me, because I've got somewhere in, yeah, there we go. So I have it all commented out, but it would look more like something like this. I'd have to explicitly say each one, but since I'm leveraging the API itself, and I'm just adhering to what they're saying, then I was able to just you know, do a loop, and obviously I didn't have to do a bunch of work. So
Is your loop off of the ship to count?
it's off to the so when you ask for shipments, it comes back with an array, and I loop through.
So if there's 4 shipments, like you'll have 4 records that look the same, except the ship to part will be different for each one.
Yeah. Well, actually, the ship to, there's only one ship to per order. Right? There's only one ship to per shipment.
But the JSON, oh, so there's only one ship to and whatever this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shipment.
You're getting, that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, the orders we make separately, but the shipments are all,
Just
one off. So this is the only time I can remember to give this example. This is one of the very few times that I'll use something other than set element or get element. So I'm using JSON list keys. And so what I want, I don't know, it doesn't say, hey, I just gave you back 8 shipments or 20 shipments or 1 shipment. I don't know what that is. So I need to find out how many shipments I got back, and this is how I do it. I get the value count of JSON list keys. This is the JSON I got back from the API, and I want to know how many shipments there are. So it'll look at the shipments, and it'll count how many keys are inside there, and I come back with 12 or 6. So this will dynamically work. I don't need to do, I don't need to know how many I get. So that's pretty important. When you want to know how many of something you got back, you have to use JSON list keys in order to count how many iterations there are, or otherwise it's a pretty big hang up if you're doing something where you don't know how much data you're getting back or how many records. So that's pretty big. All right, so for my last.
Is JSON becoming like the standard for companies that will let you access their data and REST APIs?
I would say the answer is yes. I mean, with the exception of that government thing that just came out with a brand new spec and it's horrible XML, most companies, especially new companies and tech companies, all their APIs are JSON. I mean, almost everyone I know of, really.
Makes it nice.
Yeah. I mean, there are some companies that'll give you your options. You can actually, there's some where you can actually just say, if you say my endpoint, www.starbucks.com/orders.json, it'll give you JSON back. And if you say orders.xml, it'll give you XML back.
Okay,
So
there's
that's
still the
pretty
old
common.
XML people out there.
Yeah, there are. But JSON is, I think that's what you would expect, and that's what you'd choose to use. So
it's easier to read and
Yeah.
smaller and
yeah, it's
Easier
just,
to
it's
parse.
better in every way. So for my last trick, I'm going to go back to this guy, and we've got some test proposals in here. And so what they do is they have this elaborate proposal system, but basically they've got a current version they're working on, and they send out an estimate, and they have 2 options. There's option 1 that has these scope items, and all this data is just test data, dollar amounts and all that. This is all just tests. So this is not their live data or anything. And then there's option 2, and I can drill in, and there's option 1. And if I click on the scope item, they're the bid sheets, and bid sheets have multiple. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It's a kind of a big system. But all this stuff rolls up to, hey, here's option 1 that's $140,000, and here's option 2 that's 151 or whatever that is. So they want a way for their clients to be able to accept an estimate. Now they can go in here, if they got off the phone with their client and they said, you know what, they want option 1. They can just click this guy, and now it's logged that option 1 is the one they want. But they want their clients to do that. So what they're going to have, and we just finished a proof of concept of this, is the system will automatically generate an estimate, and it will send out a URL to an app. And so I have this just on a local VM. We've got this nice little splash screen. This is a little PHP app written with CodeIgniter as a framework. But the coolest thing about this app is it's a PHP app, but it's there's no model. In the controller, all I do is I make API calls to FileMaker.
Is it CodeIgniter framework?
CodeIgniter, that's just a PHP framework. There are a gazillion out there. It's actually, Laravel is probably the king lately stuff to do.
that's what I've been using quite a bit of Laravel.
Yeah. I mean, I just haven't had time to sink into it. I've done a couple of test projects, but when there's work to do, I mean, CodeIgniter I know like the back of my hand, and I've got a bunch of boilerplate stuff with
But it's a
ODBC,
big
XML.
popular one.
Yeah. So their customer is going to get a nice HTML email, and it's going to say, hey, your estimate is ready. Would you like to review it or approve it? So all this data is straight from FileMaker from the data API. And I'm just going to let you see kind of what this looks like. So here's my URL.
get a function of the UUID from FileMaker.
That's correct. Yep, I do. What FileMaker sends is a find for this ID and then some other things, whether or not the estimate has been expired. And then that's the URL. So, and for those of you who haven't done this yet, you might notice that when FileMaker's XML interface, all that kind of stuff, usually FMI is in there somewhere. So this is the IP address of my local VM, FMI/REST/API. I'm doing a find, then you pass the solution, and then you pass the layout. For the data API, it's just like the XML interface. It's all layout. The context is all layouts,
And the fields on those.
and the fields on those layouts. That's right. Which is, that's a FileMaker thing. There's no other system in the world like that. So now what you're looking at is PHP parsing all this out and turning it into an object. The real, what FileMaker is really getting back is this. It's getting back JSON. Now this JSON, this is just kind of in human readable form that you can see. We get this giant array. We get something called field data, and all this. The FileMaker, their FileMaker 16 documentation on the API is pretty good. It's pretty robust. It tells you how to authenticate. It tells you what errors to look for. And it explains these bits like field data. So field data are all the fields on the particular layout that you are calling, and if there is a portal on there, it's going to give you portal data, and you get an array of portal information back. And other than the record ID, you're going to get just the things that are in the portal. Just like, 10 plus years ago, you only want the fields on a layout that you need. If you have summary fields on there, if you have a layout that's made for a user interface and it's got a bunch of navigation, a bunch of portals, and FileMaker is going to go and send all that down. So I almost always, without exception, create separate layouts. And in these days, they're JSON underscore estimates, JSON underscore properties, JSON underscore contacts. And the only thing you want on there is the stuff that you need. So I get back all this information. And another weird thing is that FileMaker has this lovely way of referring to portal data with these double colons. That's not very nice for PHP, so I figured out some way to parse that stuff. So I have one option, my second option, and then you'll see that these are all my scopes, but they all have these IDs. There are 3 of them that belong to one, and I guess 2 or 3 that belong to another. And then what I do is, using PHP and Twig, which is a template engine, I go and I loop through and I say, okay, get option 1, write it out, then create another table row, write out the scope, write out the scope, write out the scope. Now, I'm wrapping up because I see that we're about out of time. So I'm going to select option 1. I'm going to hit submit, and all that stuff just looped back because it's still on there. But the cool part is, ta-da! See that? It's accepted.
Beautiful.
So we just threw a very teeny tiny bit of JSON back to FileMaker, and the URL includes the record ID, and then we pass the mod ID if we want, and we pass only the values we want to change. And it's probably worth. Let me just. I'm going to show you that real quick. Update estimate.
So how do you get it back with the FileMaker API?
Yeah, I'll show you right now. Oh no, I don't want that. Okay. I want to show my data. Oh, I need to turn off my my redirect. Take them back. Uh-oh. Oh, I just closed that. So actually, I'll go ahead and uncheck this one and check this one. I mean, this is just full on work in progress. So there we go. So FileMaker tells you FileMaker tells you exactly how you need to send your data back. Now, you got to understand that pretend this is JSON, because I'm dumping it out, and PHP is automatically doing all this for me. But you have to have a data object, and then you have to have an array, and then inside that array, you have to pass in exactly. And this is what's really documented well in the FileMaker documentation. All I'm doing is I'm passing back in my options portal. I have is accepted, and that .1 is the first portal row, and .2 is the second portal row. And my value is I'm passing back a 0 for the first one and a 1 for the second one. And then accepted at is, so I used PHP to say, give me the current timestamp, and I'm passing it in. And then accepted by, and then I just set a string that says client, which means that it's coming from here. And then this mod ID is kind of cool. I'm also passing the mod ID. Notice how it's sticking out here. There's data, but then the mod ID is here. What this does is, if I don't know if I can break this right now, but I can try. Oh no, maybe it's this that I need to change. Let me see if this does it. No, that's working. If the mod ID, what the mod ID does is, if someone changes the record in FileMaker, the mod ID updates, and then when I'm here and I try to go send it, it'll say, you can't do this. It actually traps for that, and it'll say, it'll throw an error and say, this record has been updated and you're too late. Now the mod ID is optional, but if you include the mod ID, you just have that extra layer of protection. If someone goes and does something once and then they try to update the record, it'll say you don't have the right mod ID. You'd have to refresh the page.
You don't want them approving something that's not
Christ.
accurate.
It's not
Yeah.
the latest version.
Yeah, or even just if someone tries to do something, if they download the record and the mod ID is 42, when they try to update it, if someone changed something in that option, now that it's 43 and 42 will say, oh, this is not a match, and it throws an error.
Do you have a separate layout for writing back? Or does it just?
No, it's the same layout because
what it needs to?
it's the same layout because I mean, you don't really know what you're going to get back. I could update a bunch of stuff. I just happen to be updating those rows, and let me just run to that layout real quick. And so that's the ugly back-end layout. But yeah, theoretically, I could update all that stuff, but I'm only updating.
Just this portal.
Just those two portal records. Now, ultimately, they want their clients to be able to choose at the scope item level, and so that's going to be a little bit tricky, and that's going to require some JavaScript stuff, because if they choose a scope item, then they can't choose a different option and all that. But so let's see. I think that's yeah. So that's all the stuff I have to show.
Wow. Can you back up? I had one question.
Thank you all.
Great.
Back to the asphalt one,
Back up to
to the asphalt.
oh,
database.
Yeah.
And go back to the main screen of that one.
Mhm.
What is your versions along the left there?
So the versions are they started with version 1. It doesn't have any options in it. This is all test data. When they create a proposal, they start off with one version. So they'll have a version, and I'll just choose this for a minute, and they can have options and scope items and all this stuff. And let's say that the client comes back and says, you know what, I want to do something different, or they sort of messed up, but they don't want to lose what they told the client, and so they'll create a new version of it. But they get to keep all the historical information from that. So I
So it's just a
archived.
duplicated record, basically, with the modifications.
It's kind of a duplicated record. Yeah, it's so they can keep track of all the different versions of a proposal that they sent to a client. I mean, some of the things
What
they
does it
bid
say
on.
underneath? Is it archival?
Yeah, it says archived.
Okay.
Yeah. It says archive. So these two, so you can archive and
So
unarchive
when they
whenever
had
you
their
want.
choices, and you had 3 there, the first one had been declined basically, so you're displaying the first 2, or you're.
No.
These are 2 options under one version.
Yeah. So the versions really don't come into play. What the version, you could think of the version as the estimate itself. The estimate that they saw was only version 2 because they had 2 options, and then underneath those options were these guys.
Versions are kind of like workspaces. Like, all right, I did this, but this came out wrong. So instead
Yeah.
of losing everything, it's
Yeah. They want to go back and say that they're on a new
So you just have one version active.
There's only
at all
one.
time?
There can
active
only be
version.
yes. There can only be one active. Now I was testing around and moving things around, and I probably just for sanity, version 3
so
should
if
be
you're like
the.
building a house, you could have 5 different options with a different facade, or adding this
Yeah,
bedroom and.
But
doing
that's
this
more
and-
about options. Versions is we sent out a proposal and they didn't accept it, and we need to go back and do something
tweak
different.
it some more.
Yeah. Now options are they can choose. They want their client to get these options. Yeah, you can do a 2-car garage with a granny flat on top or not. Option 1 would be the house. Option 2 would be the house plus the granny flat, maybe.
Now, are you allowed to do on your more than 2 options?
Yeah, you can do as many.
versions?
Yeah, they can do as many
Well,
versions as they
unlimited?
want. As many. The versions are really it's like version control. So you're only going to have one active. But the options, there can be as many options as you want for a version, as many scopes. I mean, I can add another option, and you'll notice. So this icon is clear, and these are solid, and
Right.
so I can actually do this. And now that scope item is moved under option 3.
As a copy or?
So now it just moved, but based on a review with the client yesterday, they want to be able to copy/move if they want.
and this is all business.
cool.
Like the reason to do this is because this is the way the client wants to work. Like the next client may or may not want to do it this way.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a. Yeah, I'm gonna put this back, and then I can actually. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this guy. I mean, there is a ton of. They have. I mean, when you do pavement stuff, there's all these calculations about the depth and the width and the amount of materials and the piping and. I mean, I had no idea it was involved. I mean, the calculations are a nightmare.
If you do this one instead of this one, or if I make it like this instead of like that, that's what all those.
Yeah, I mean, so when they make these bid templates, here's this one template. So here are all the items listed, and they can hear all the material, and then the general material is one thing, but if it's pipe, then they have all these other weird values that they put in. Equipment is something different. I mean, I've had all these weird ways of handling all this stuff. It all works great, but so for materials is the only thing that they actually have products. So these things are all products. So if I can go up here and I want to add a product. So there's this product picker, and then they've got their products by category. So here's all the asphalt products. And if I see a 2, that means that they have vendors that sell this. So if I click this guy, I think if I click this guy, so now I can go and I can, if I just pick this, it would say type 7 type 1 base if I added here. But I can also go and add a vendor with an actual price with it as well. That's just more part of their system. But it's it's pretty involved. I mean, they have all these weird calculations about their tonnage and hauling, and the math behind here is just crazy.
Do you own the intellectual property?
Oh, of course, yeah.
You gotta market it nationally.
No, we don't. No, yeah. So I guess that's.
I just saw something similar to this. A lady did it with a project management system online called thepulsemonday.com. And the whole idea, that's getting popular now, where they make it available for client approval online.
Yeah, there's a company called Scope RFP, and you can submit RFPs and it manages all of it for you. We use Harvest for invoicing and estimates, and Harvest has that feature when we might write up a detailed estimate for a client, but at the end of the day, when we want them to sign off on, $10,000 project, we create an estimate harvest, and it goes out to them, and just like that other system, and they click accept, we get a notification, and then you can turn it into an invoice later and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So that harvest, so that client, he accepts our estimates in harvest, and that's what gave him the idea of what I showed you.
Did they look at harvest first?
Well, just the fact that they only ever used, the only thing they know about harvest is that's how they get our estimates.
But did they look at it before and found it wanting, like, was it limited, harvest is functionality limited compared to like what this actually does?
Well, I guess yes and no. I mean, when he said, the way this guy talked was, well, we want our clients to be able to just go online and, like the way we accept estimates with you, we want to do that. Only we want a bunch more stuff. But that's what spawned his thing. And so we're doing this project in sprints, so they're kind of bite-sized chunks of work. And for this particular sprint, normally you wouldn't do something like that till way at the end, but we thought it would be a good idea to do proof of concept. And he was super excited, even though that's, it's not going to go live for a long time.
It's incredible. You guys are way ahead.
Well, we've got that one piece we've done, but we've got a lot of work before we, catch up to where that is. I think I closed this, so later on I'm gonna find something that I broke or.
This part is the encore, by the way. It's like the Bon Jovi of FileMaker.
No. But this is some, sounds like some people do some PHP stuff. This is a controller, it's an estimates class, and then I've got all my methods here, and do something pretty cool. So with FileMaker's API, you've got to go and, when you want to use the API, the first thing you have to do is you have to create a token. You have to authenticate, and then you have to pass that token in the header every time you make a subsequent call, and it expires after 15 minutes. And so,
Just
pardon?
on the dot or an activity?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know. I remember something about 15 minutes, but maybe it's 15 minutes of inactivity. So I've got this little method called get API token. That's where I get my token. And what I do is, when I'm finished, I set a cookie. So if I get I call get API token, and if the cookie isn't empty, I return the cookie and I'm done. However, if it expired, because I write the cookie for 15 minutes, if it's expired, then here's my FileMaker URL, and then / and then the solution. And then I pass my username, my password, they're stored as constants in the config file. My layout is users. And then I go get this token, and then I set the cookie for 15 minutes. So every time I make a call, I just make sure I have a token. And then this is also something that is worth pointing out, because even though it's PHP, you need to do the same thing with FileMaker is, here. So I use this third party. Are we off? Are we down there?
We're still going.
Okay.
Yeah.
I use this third party library called HTTPful, and it's just an HTTP REST client. So I instantiate it, and then here's this add header, and then fm-data-token, and then I pass my token. Without this, you will never ever get anything back from FileMaker from the data API. So you have to pass that header in. So if you're using insert from URL inside your curl options, you would pass that in. There's a great tool called Postman that we use for a lot of testing. Yeah. So you can set all your headers. So this is I bet I have an example of this too. So Foreman, get estimate. So my headers. So this is me testing some stuff. I don't have to go to FileMaker. I don't have to go to PHP. This is basically this wonderful app and suite that you can do all this cool stuff with. You can set variables, and I mean, it's awesome. But so here, if actually, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to send this. See that?
See what comes back.
See that?
Mhm.
Invalid FileMaker data API token, because I got that token, a week ago or a month ago.
Expired.
So somewhere else in here, I don't know where it is. Somewhere else in here, I actually. Oh wait, you know what? Here it is. So here is where I authenticate. So I pass my. Also, without this header, this won't work. You have to say the content type. So here's my test credentials, and I'm going to pass it, and there's my token. So I'm going to take that token. I'm going to go back to this. I'm going to paste my token in and send it. And there's all my data.
Some cool stuff you can do in here. I'll show you how to do this after the stream, but you can have that token function automatically store the results of that in an environment variable, and then in your call in here, it'll pull it from the environment variable, so you don't have to do the copying and pasting between.
Yeah, I don't use this like it should. I mean, I have some of this stuff, but this is mostly just URLs. I mean, I know you can do a lot more with it. The
token thing though is really confusing.
Yeah, I mean, of course, yeah. I'm glad. Now, yeah, my goal is to figure that out, and if I can't, I'll email you. That would be very cool. So, all right, well.
You do a little script in the tests area, and then it saves it in the environment.
Oh.
You call it in the other.
Okay. Yeah, this is really cool. Like you can get all this data back however you want. It can if it's XML, you can, and it didn't figure it out, you can click XML and it'll try to format in XML. Of course, this is an XML, it's JSON, but it knows it's JSON. By the way, so these are all the things that I got back from FileMaker and the web server that's running. So I'm running Apache. It talks about the content type, the encoding, cache, the date. So these are all the headers I got back, including, there's my status, 200 OK. So, and this will, we can keep on, we can keep on clicking this for at least 15 minutes and it'll work. And there's the nice pretty data that I showed you in the web viewer that was kind of parsed out. Okay, I really should stop talking because I'll keep on talking. Does anyone have any other questions, or is there anything you want me to go back and show, or I think we're good?
So Postman, $8 a month for one user.
That's for some of their advanced features.
Yeah, it's
There's a
free
free
unless
version.
you want to, huh?
There's a free version I just
Yeah.
saw. So.
Yeah.
Wow.
You can I think you can pay, and you can share environment variables, and you can share all kinds of stuff with different people. So it's a really great tool.
The collections and things.
Yeah, we use it. I mean, you can see over here, we use it quite a bit. We've got a pretty large, we've got this huge API that we talk to for Turner for a certain service they have called Shops. And so, you can see how many calls. This is just me testing. This isn't even in our app. To the degree that you do web development, and this is a great tool once you start doing stuff in FileMaker. If you know what you're doing, but you want to not have to get inside FileMaker to your code and just do some light testing, this is a way to do it. But I believe Todd Geist came out with a tool that does something very similar, but it's all FileMaker-esque.
Built-in FileMaker, yeah.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
It's built in FileMaker.
And apparently it'll generate scripts for you.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. I mean, that's what Marty downloaded because he doesn't know JSON. He doesn't know anything else. But that was what kind of got him familiar with. DEI. I thought it would have come up.
Interactive
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, based on whatever the API is or whatever you want to do.
Generator.
Yeah, generator.
So, yeah, this is probably, I should have mentioned this, and I will if I do this presentation again. This is probably a great resource to use. This kind of reminds me of when SQL Explorer came out in 2012 or whenever it did from Jason Young. I mean, when Execute SQL came out, it opened up a whole new world, but a lot of people had a hard time wrapping their heads around it. And he came up with a free tool. He won some FileMaker award. I mean, I used that. I mean, that really helped me until I got used to the FileMaker way of doing things. Well, thank you all for letting me do this. I enjoyed it, and
Great program.
thanks a lot.
But yeah, okay, we're all set.
This is gonna be posted up on YouTube or on your,
Yeah, this is going to be on the same YouTube channel and on the link we're going to go to. All right, I'm going to end our.